Hello, and welcome to the 24th episode of the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. My name's Ryan Blake. I'm the founder and CEO of Extreme Sports Performance. In this episode, I'm speaking to Bobby Thatcher. Bobby is an ex-international rower and currently the Director of Rowing at St Paul's School in London. I ask him the questions I ask all my guests: who he is, what he does, where's he come from and what has he done along the way. What are the key moments from his career so far? What are his top areas of interest? What are the most valuable things he's learnt? Who are his top influencers? What are his top resources for information? What are his top sports performance exercises and or drills? What are his top pieces of advice in life, exercise and or sport? And finally, where can people find him? We freestyle a lot in between questions. Really enjoyed recording this episode with Bobby. Hope you enjoy listening to it. Here we go. Hi, Bobby. Welcome to the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. Please, can you start by telling everyone who you are and what you do?
Well, my name is Bobby Thatcher. I'm the Director of Rowing at St Paul's School in London.
And could you just give us an insight to how you got and when you got to where you are and what you've done in your career leading up to this point?
Well, I used to be on the national team in the sort of 90s and early 2000s on the British national team. I went to the 96 Olympics in the double scull. Was world silver medalist in the men's 8 at the World Championships in 99. 2000 was my last year in the team. I didn't make the 8 for Sydney. I got dropped just before going to Sydney, and that basically signalled the end of my rowing career. And then I was basically stuck. I didn't really know what to do. I tried a few jobs in marketing and thought about going into the army, and I didn't really find my niche. So I basically sort of ventured into coaching because it's what I knew. I'd spent my whole life rowing, and so I basically started coaching at Latimer Upper School. Coached the under-15s for a year, then went off to Windsor Boys School for a year, and then came back to run the programme at Latimer. And I did that for 6 years. And then the job opportunity came up at St Paul's, so I've been there ever since. I went to St Paul's in September 2011, so I'm on my 10th season now there. So it's been quite a while, actually.
Awesome. And what would you say if you could pick the key moments from your career being so far to date?
As an athlete or a coach?
Both, probably. Mix and match them. If one stands out from more one side than the other, great. But just, I suppose, overall, really.
I think as an athlete, there's sort of points in your career where you've won stuff or done something like pretty special. Like, I've won a couple of world medals and I broke a world record in the men's 8 once. But I didn't really give it much thought at the time. I was quite young, I was in my early 20s, and you're just thinking about the process of training. So I think it doesn't really it's easily forgotten. I think the ones where I'm coaching sort of stick with me more vividly because you're trying to sort of lead a group of like young guys, and a lot of them have come to you without any sort of background in the sport, and you're trying to sort of teach them how to do it, get the sort of mindset and the ethic of training and develop the technique. And when you actually achieve something, you feel like you've put a lot more of yourself into it because you've got a group of people around you and the kids that you're coaching to actually get to that point. So I'd say the stuff I've done as a coach has been, more rewarding for me as personally, and I think I've taken a lot more of sort of enjoyment out of that compared to what I did as an athlete. But I'd say the main ones were probably the first Henley win for St Paul's in 2015. It was the first win since 97. And then I guess the 2018 season was pretty special. The boys won Henley again, but they did it they took 11 seconds off the record, which, that record's probably going to stand for a good 20 odd years, and that was pretty special. And those guys also did a world best time for a junior crew at Dorney Lake. They did 5:36, which again, I can't see a schoolboy crew beating that. So I guess those are the main ones that really, even though I wasn't a part of it as an athlete, but the process of leading that and coaching the guys towards that was pretty special.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if people know this, but obviously we've worked together for the last 3 years, and that 2018 season was fantastic to be a part of. What do you think made those guys as a crew so good? What do you think were the fundamental reasons for them having so much success?
I mean, they were very talented guys. I mean, there's no taking away from that. There's some very, very good individuals within that group. But I think it was the work ethic around the group, but also like the technique that they were rowing, but also like the training they were doing, like the stuff they're doing on the water, in the gym, the weight training they were doing. I think it was very well structured and planned out, but also their work ethic was awesome. They're schoolboys. They go to a very academic school, and there's a lot of academic pressure on them to do the work. So obviously, sport comes second to their academics. But we had like a key session every day, and around those sessions, we had extra sort of low intensity sessions, and they were optional, and like all the guys religiously did them like all the way through the year. So when it came to the summer racing season, they had a really good foundation of training, and they were extremely fit guys as well as extremely talented.
Fantastic. And most of those guys have gone on to do great things at university now.
Well, if you go through the crew, the bowman Cameron Kinroy, he's rowing at Harvard. He's rowing for the Harvard Lightweights. He was in their 2V last year, but he's probably going to make their 1V this year. Two-man, Leo von Malays, he's at Oxford. He rowed ISIS last year in the reserve boat race for Oxford. He's in the squad again this year. I don't know what crew he's going to make, but he's in the mix. 3C is Alex Langston Bolt. He's at Cal. Again, he's probably around the 2V, I'd have thought. 4C was Ollie Parish, who is rowing for Cambridge. He's in his first year there. Ollie is a junior world champion that year, and then last year won a world silver medal. Now he's off to Cambridge, so he's probably going to be in the reserve boat this year in Goldie. 5 seats, Calvin Tarzi, double world junior champion. He's at Harvard, doing very well, very strong. He's really one of the phenomenally talented guys in the boat. He'll probably be in the Harvard 1V this year. Dow de Graaf, also double world champion at Harvard as well. Harvard 1V rower again. 7 seat, Tom Horncastle, another junior world champion. He's just started at Harvard. He's probably going to be in their 2V this year, but if very talented, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's in their 1V sooner or later. And then the stroke seat was George Dickinson, who went straight into the Princeton lightweight 1V. Another really, and also a junior world champion, so another really, really talented guy. So, and the Cox is Axel de Bossard, who's at Princeton, but he's got too big, so he's joined the lightweight program, so he's rowing now. But yeah, they're all rowing in like top universities, and they're all carrying on in the sport, and many of them will be like rowing in the varsity boat. A lot of them in the US. I think there's only 2 guys in that crew that stayed in the UK.
Awesome. And am I right in thinking that quite a lot of those guys over different holiday periods come back and train at St Paul's with the current senior squads?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool actually. When we were over in Boston for the Head of the Charles in October, we had 14 guys racing who've left St Paul's in the last 4 years, all racing for their universities in the US. And a lot of those guys, like, it's just like it never used to happen, but it's like a really sort of like it's quite fun culture to be around. Like all the guys just really like coming back, and we'll put out crews over the Christmas holidays, and they'll just mix in with the younger guys, like the sort of 16s and up at St Paul's. Some of them are there. You've got guys like David Ambler and Freddie Davidson who left in 2016. They were both under 23 world champions last year, and Freddie's the president of Cambridge, and David's the captain of Harvard. And the boys look up to them because they didn't know them. They hadn't even started rowing by the time these guys left. And then they'll come along and they'll jump in boats with these young guys they don't know. But it's an awesome resource to have guys that well known and talented just to come back and row with the next generation. So it's pretty cool to see. We did it again this Christmas, and we're back again on the 3rd. And there's quite a few guys who, especially the Harvard guys, don't fly back till mid-January. So they'll all be around St Paul's at the start of training next week. So it's really cool. It's really fun.
That's awesome. And how important do you think the culture for the SPS Boat Club has been in kind of creating that freedom or opportunity for those older guys to come back and join in? Do you think that's the fundamental reason why they do it, or do you think there are other reasons?
They have a real fondness for the boat club.
Yeah.
I think they sort of see it as, without the boat club, I probably wouldn't be rowing at Harvard or, rowing at Cambridge or wherever, because there's so many of them. It's not like just one or two guys, it's loads of them. And I think it's almost, I don't ever want to take anything for granted because, we're going through some pretty good times, and you just don't know that could disappear. So we don't, I'm really sort of thankful for what we have. But I think they have this fondness for the boat club, and they see that, like some of these guys rowed with the older guys when they were still at school, so they sort of see that, it's not like a duty, but they know that they're part of this thing, and they might be 21 years old, but they're still part of the boat club, and they still want to see it successful, and they still want to pass on their knowledge to the younger guys as well.
Awesome. No, I think that's great, and it's awesome to see, and it's quite rare. I don't think you see that a lot in many sports these days, and especially when people are the other side of the world. So I think it's an awesome thing, and long may it continue. So I just wanted to change tack slightly here. So you can come at this as an athlete and or as a coach, but what or maybe I can ask you a kind of a split question. But what would you say your kind of top areas of interest are were as a rower, and now are as a coach, that you feel are really important for success?
As a rower, I think I was quite blind to it, really. I just think I just did what I was told, and I didn't really sort of give it too much thought. I think, because I came from like Jürgen Grobler's system, where it's just a horrendous amount of training, and there's not really much thought about how you do it.
Yeah.
So, when I think back to when I was younger, it was just pulling as hard as I could and getting through each day, and it wasn't very sort of smart, really. I mean, if I had my time again as an athlete, I think I would go about it a completely different way. But at that time, I don't think I really know any different. But I think as a coach, I've been lucky enough to work with some very good people, and I think as a coach and as an athlete as well. But you think most of the time athletes are young, so you might miss the opportunities, or they might slip you by. But as a coach, you're generally older, and I think you realise that you're always learning. You're always, you don't know everything, and there's people around you that you can use and work with that really develop your ideas about technique, about training, and rest and recovery, and I think as I've got older, I've learned that you're always continuing to develop and learn, but also sorry, I've completely lost where I am. It
was just around areas of interest as top areas of interest as a coach, or as an athlete.
As in the sport.
Yeah.
As in areas of interest in sport. Yeah, no, I was saying as an athlete, I don't think I really remember having the interest in it. It's just I wanted to be as best as I could be.
Yeah.
It was all very blind. I didn't know about good rowing. I didn't know about smart training. It was just do as you're told and work hard, and I wanted to win races. And I didn't really have any sort of interest in any areas, I guess. But as a coach, I think I sort of, expanded my interest area as I've got like more knowledgeable. And I think sort of using people like yourself in strength conditioning is like, looking at areas where you can improve. And, it's not just about rowing. There's many areas of improving the sport or making yourself a better athlete or, a better coach. And, I think over the years I've shown my interests have gone towards like, strength conditioning, like using psychology, technique. I used Donald Leggett, who who comes in like once a week from Christmas, who is a good resource in like, improving technique, but also, as a sounding board. I think if you're on your own, it's really hard to sort of develop. But if you've got sort of a team of people around you, then I think it's much easier to sort of see where you're going or make sure you're going in the right direction. I don't know if that really answers the question.
No, it does. It does. That's really interesting. It's a bit. I really didn't know what you were going to say there, but like I completely hear where you're coming from. Just to kind of follow on from that, like from when you kind of first ever got in a boat to now, what would you kind of say the most valuable things you've learned are to date?
I mean, if you just strip it back to the bare bones, I would just say like work ethic. Like, in a sport like rowing, it is very technical. People don't think it is, but it is very, very technical. But it's the main foundation of the sport is like hard work. Like there's no getting away from it. Like you can't rely on natural talent, like, or physicality. Like you've got to work hard. And I think that's the thing that I had as a kid. I came from a very working class background and didn't really have much else. So, it was something that I had that I could really focus on. I wasn't very academic or very good at school. And then I found something that I was starting to be okay at. And then I just really sort of tunnel visioned on it and committed everything towards it. And I'd say that, that in terms of where I've come and how I've developed as a person, I think I'm very single-minded, and I have the ability to work really hard if I'm like focused on something, and I think that's what I've taken from the sport, like as an athlete, but also like coming forward as the coach. I think one of the reasons I'm successful as a coach is that I'm really obsessive and I don't let go. If I want to do something, I'll lock onto it and not give up until I've done it.
Yeah.
And you see that with the boys as well. They learn that, like, and it's a really sort of powerful thing that they, I think most people in our society today are quite flaky, I guess, and they're quite easy to give up and throw things away. But I think, not everyone in the boat club is like that, but the guys who tend to rise to the surface do develop that. And, maybe it's a trait that's within them, but I think, rowing and the boat club sort of really brings that out of them. That sort of single-mindedness and focus to work incredibly hard on the task ahead. When I think, I've got 2 young kids, and I'm not going to push them towards sport, but I wouldn't be too upset if they rowed, because I know it gives them that sort of like focus to work hard, which I think can be quite rare.
I think there's a lot of crossover in mindset with sport and just not just academics, but just general life as well. And I think I was very lucky when I was young that I was a very gifted athlete. I was always quite quick and didn't really get that injured, but I was quite small, and I never really had the luxury of support or understanding on all the kind of sports science elements that a lot of young athletes have today. And I feel that does help, but it fundamentally does come down to the mindset of the individual, and you either have it or you don't, and you can develop things to a certain point, but if you don't kind of have that, I suppose, genetic foundation or that kind of solid mindset, it's very difficult.
No, but I also think that it can be learned to a certain extent.
Sure.
I've seen it with the kids who sort of they come through the system and you sort of think they haven't quite got it mentally, but they're persistent, they stick with it, and then you can see that they can get through it. Like they can sort of teach themselves.
Yeah.
I don't want to say like be tough or be hard or whatever, but I think it is. It can be a learned process to be able to sort of have some sort of mental robustness. You can teach yourself to be that, to be tough, I guess. But yeah, I mean, but not always. It's it's not always the case. You have some guys who just don't. You just don't like hurting themselves really or working hard, and it doesn't matter how much they want to do it. If deep down you don't have that sort of personal drive to overcome that, then it's you're never going to achieve it. But yeah.
Sure. No, I completely hear you, mate. And yeah, it's fascinating to see and be a part of. So being involved in not just rowing but lots of different sports are fun. Every sport has its specific culture, and that can play a really important part in development, especially with young athletes. So just to move on, who would you say your biggest influence have been in your career as an athlete, as a coach?
My biggest influence was a guy called Harry Mann. He was a New Zealand guy. He was famous for coaching like the New Zealand crews in the 70s and 80s. And he worked with Cambridge in the early 90s. And Harry was just like technically amazing, like a technical genius. I've never been coached by anyone like him, like phenomenal. Like, and he was brought in with the men's 8. Like, he was just did a few sort of sessions a week with us, so a few technical sessions, and it was very sort of different to what we've been exposed to because Jürgen Grobler was the head coach of men's rowing, and he's very much his ethic is just hard work, lots of mindless hard work, and he once said to me that that the technique was like salad dressing. It was just the finishing touches. So his foundation was not technical at all, and he didn't really value Harry. So I think at the time he didn't really see Harry. He had this guy. We had this guy coming out with us once or twice a week, and British rowing was very much separate then. The crews were a little bit more separate than they are now. Now it's just like very East German. They're all in the same centre. They're all under Jürgen. But back then, like the men's 8 had a little bit more freedom. So we could get other guys in without really Jürgen having much influence on it. So, and this guy just basically changed the way I thought about it, especially for me as a smaller guy. Most of the rowers are just freaking massive, and I was the smallest guy on the team. Probably I was like 6'3" and 90 kilos for a rower. That's tiny. And like Harry, basically, it was all about movement and finesse and technique, and not just about just brute force. It was about sort of like a beautiful movement and in time with the boat, and without sort of movement without slowing the boat down. I mean, you think about these rowers are big guys, and some of them are 120 kilos, and if they're sliding up and down, that's a lot of mass moving, and it can act as a handbrake. And someone like Jürgen would just look at absolute power, where Harry would just look at sort of the finesse of movement. And if you do that well, the boat can fly. It doesn't matter how. You need a certain amount of strength, but you could get a guy at 90 kilos kicking out 500 watts, who would be sort of kicking the crap out of a guy who's 20 kilos heavier and producing 200 more watts than he is. And they could go faster just because of he's applying everything he has and not slowing the boat down, where the big strong guy is putting power in the water, but he's also killing it as well. So from him, I sort of learned there's a different sport basically. If it's done well, then you don't need to be a massive bloke, But you look at the world stage now. There's still very few people that are rowing to the levels that Harry sort of tried to get us to row to, and that's what I do in my rowing. I have this sort of vision in my mind of what it should look like, and I aim towards that of how the boys are moving and what the boat's doing, and is it accelerating, is it decelerating, and Harry's the big influence in that, and that's why I use Donald a lot as well, because Donald coached with Harry, so we're on the same page technically. We have the same idea of what we're looking for. Because luckily enough, I was coached by Harry for 2 years, and I learned a lot from him in those 2 years, and it changed my view of the sport massively. And Donald coached with Harry for, I don't know, 5-6 years, I guess, and they became very good friends. But Harry passed away like in the early 2000s. I think Donald's been a big influence as well, because he's sort of he is on the same sort of mindset, and he's a guy in his late 70s and he's been around the sport a long time, so he's a really sort of useful resource. But I'd say Harry was like the guy who's completely transformed the way I think about the sport and influenced me. And hopefully you see that in the crews now. I think especially the 2018 boat would really sort of replicates what Harry was trying to do. And if you look at the times they were doing, like their average 2K ergo in that 2018 boat was 6:16, but they were beating men's boats with ergos probably 20 seconds faster per man. And it shows you that you don't need to pull those massive ergos if you do it well. But if you do pull those ergos and you do it well, you're gonna set the world on fire, which so many crews still don't do when you look internationally.
How important would you say that testing is, and what tests do you value more than the others, and how often would you think it's necessary to do them in a season?
Well, we test we do 5 ergo tests a year, and they're basically dictated to us by GB rowing, because a lot of the boys go through the GB selection process. So we have to do the testing that they do. So there's 5 tests a year. It's like 2 5Ks and 3 2Ks, and they tend to be the yardstick for for rowing testing, really. What you pull for 5K and what you pull for 2K. But I wouldn't do any more than that, because I think an ergo test is obviously a very difficult thing to do, and I wouldn't want to sort of put more on the guys. So it is important. I think mentally it's important as well. Not just to measure where you are physically, but they are very stressful tests. If you do put yourself in a very sort of difficult, hard place, really. When I used to do them, I used to have sleepless nights before them, and I would be in fear of the pain, and then the boys go through the same, and so then but they are sort of vital pieces of information, like how fit they are, how strong they are, how they cope, because halfway through that test there's going to be some serious questions asked so they can put it themselves. So and you can see where the guys crack or not. So they are important, but on top of that, we do threshold ergos every week, and you get a rough idea where the guys are as well. Each week we'll alternate between a half hour at rate 24 and 310s as step rate. And in the summer we keep the set 310s going because they keep the threshold training going, but we sort of take away the half hour and we do 5 3s for a bit more sort of lactate tolerance, which is a bit more replicated to what they're doing in racing wise, the intensity of 2K side by side racing, because in the winter it's more sort of time trial, longer distance pieces. So they get assessed weekly, I guess, with the threshold, and then 5 times a year with a test.
When you rode, when you were in the GB squad, how often would you guys do lactate tests, and how important do you think they are? Can they as a coach, are they useful? Can they give you good information, or do you think that there's a space where you could possibly look at doing alternative things which are just as useful?
We used to do a 4-minute step test where we get our lactate taken, and from that we would get given sort of our training zones, our heart rate training zones.
Yeah.
So UT2 would be based on your UT2 level would be based on what your heart rate was at 2 millimoles of lactate, and so you get given zones from it, and it was useful. you sort of get told, like, because we used to do so much volume that, if you're doing 40k a day and most of that's at UT2, then you get given your, my ranges would be like, I don't know, 140 to 150 heart rate, and that if I'm going over that, I'm going to be producing too much lactic acid, like to get the development of what I need to do in that zone. It's all about sort of increasing the ability to process oxygen. Like, so if you're working too hard, then you're not going to improve that. So that was useful, but that's where I sort of look back and think that I could have done things a bit smarter, because the physiologist would give you these results. I'm sure Jürgen would get a copy of them. And then we would be on training camps, and I would be sort of sitting on my heart rate, and Jürgen would come over and say, "You're not working hard enough." And I say, "Well, I'm on my heart rate." And he says, "Take your heart rate monitor off," because he was just about output. So I'd always be, and obviously I wanted to please him rather than be in my correct zone. So I'd take my heart rate off, and most of the work would be too hard. So I think I wasn't really quite getting the improvement that I necessarily could if I'd ignored him and stayed in my zone. So I often felt that it was useful. It was very useful, but Jürgen didn't always listen to the physiologist. But at school, we don't do lactate testing at school. What we do is we just get the boys to wear heart rate monitors, and then and sort of more do sort of like perceived effort, and we'll track their split and their heart rate and sort of see where they are. And you can sort of roughly work out they're in the right zone. You can tell if they're working too hard, and I think the main thing is not letting them work too hard. It's sort of just be quite like low key, especially like the base of the training. But it's something I'd quite like to do at school at some point, so the boys do get like a more accurate like training zone level by doing lactate testing. But it's something that we have to look into for the future. But at the moment, it's more sort of perceived level.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and I've utilised lactate testing in lots of different sports I've worked with, and it is useful to have a more accurate value or range, but it's not the be all and end all of success. Yeah. So I just interested to hear your take on that. I do think there are other things you can do which are just as valuable. I know that since I've known you anyway, that I don't know if it's once a year or more than that, but you take the boys down usually to Dorney and you hook them up with a Russian biomechanist. Could you just give us a bit more insight into that and why you do it and how it helps?
It's a guy called Valery Kleshnev. Was in the Russian Olympic team in the 80s. And he's basically built all this kit himself. It's just measuring like forces. I mean, you can buy. It's called telemetry. You can buy stuff. It's about $12,000, I think, like a set that goes on the boat. And it just measures like the amount of force you put down. But his is a lot more scientific. I think it's quite fragile. It's sort of it measures a hell of a lot more than just the force. It sort of measures like basically what you're doing wrong as well, in terms of like what you're taking away as well as what you're putting in. He has sensors on the seat, sensors on the foot stretcher. Like he has sensors on the oars, and it's pretty complicated. And it's taken me quite a while to sort of get to understand a lot of his figures. But I think the main thing it does is it highlights what we're doing well, but it also highlights what we could improve on. And I think the thing that I quite like about it is that what he says we're doing well and what we say we can improve on is the same thing that you see like visually. And you're telling the boys, and he'll say the same thing and reinforce it with his figures, which is pretty cool, because then the boys sort of don't just get it from one angle. They say, right, we need to do this better. And you've got this like the world-leading biomechanics guy saying the same thing, but with figures. And he will come into school as well, and he will give a lecture and present his findings. And that's really, really useful, because like technically he's on the same, because there's different ways to skin a cat. Like, there's different countries that have slightly different styles, and people win medals rowing different ways. But the way he sort of says is biomechanically correct is the way that we that we try and teach at St Paul's. So when you've got this guy coming in and saying the same things in slightly different ways, but ultimately like the same sort of the same sort of focuses, and it's the boy. I think the boys find it quite interesting, but also St Paul's boys are very sort of mathematically driven, so they really like the data.
Yeah.
But it does reveal things that you hadn't quite seen sometimes, or you hadn't quite thought about, or whereabouts the boys are set up in the boat. Like some guys might be a bit too short, so you might adjust their span. Like basically, like setting up a rowing boat can be quite complicated. There's a lot of adjustments to row different arc lengths. So you might see some of the data and change a few things individually, but it's really useful. We do it twice a year. We generally do it sort of end of January, beginning of February, and you get an idea of where you are as a crew. And then we do it again like in the summer, like about a month before Henley, so you can sort of see, you get given a load of information at the end of winter, and you go away and you sort of try and improve on certain areas, and then you do it again in the summer, and you sort of see how you've improved, or where you've got to in those months of training. But generally, the main thing you always come away and aim to improve is length, like connected length. Like that's the most important thing in rowing, is rowing long. That's why rowers tend to be really tall. So generally you're never rowing as long as you hope, but then he gives you the data that sort of shows you that. I think one of the key things as well, we've had really good guys like Dow de Graaf, not a massive guy, but really, really effective. And part of Valeria's testing is that you do rate changes. So you start the piece in a low rate, like probably sort of 22, and you finish the piece at like 42, and you're taking like double the amount of strokes. And one's at sort of paddling speed, and the other one is flat out. But the guys who are really good will be able to do the same amount of work per stroke at 22 as they do at 42. And the not so strong guys will, as the rate goes up, their work per stroke will go down because they become less effective as they're moving faster. But the really good guys like Dower can maintain the same work per stroke at 22 as 42. So the other key thing we try and do is regardless of the rate, we try and sort of maintain the same like work per stroke, which is technically very difficult. So I think that's what that's one of the reasons why we try and develop a certain style of rowing, so that we can maintain what we're doing, regardless of how physically tired you are or what the stroke rate is.
Awesome. No, that's really interesting, and I think it's pretty awesome that level of detail is going into a junior crew. I think I don't suppose everyone it gets that luxury, but I feel that from what you've said, it sounds like it can really help.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing I've noticed about St Paul's boys. Like we go to GB trials. I mean, I don't want to sort of slag off the rest of the schools, but like the St Paul's boys will sit at trials and they'll know exactly what they're looking for. I mean, they're smart kids, but they'll know exactly what they're looking for, how they want to row, and most of the kids from the other schools just won't have a clue, like not a notion. And and I think back to when I was a kid, like I didn't have a clue. I just used to pull hard and race hard. I just didn't have an idea of how I was doing it or why I was doing it. But all the St Paul's boys are very sort of like tuned in to, okay, this is what we need to be doing and this is what we're looking for, which is pretty cool. But also when they go off to programs, like university programs, where it doesn't have the same sort of level of focus or technical mindset, then they sometimes struggle with that they sort of think, well, we were so much more professional at school than we are at university.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard a lot of people say that, not just with rowing, but with rugby, with track and field as well. Like the way they're set up, particularly at St Paul's, but just generally at school, is a lot different to university. And it's a lot more independent at uni. I think you have to do a lot of more things for yourself than people expect. So it's a
Yeah,
bit
no,
of a shock for some
yeah,
people.
yeah.
So if you needed to find out or kind of obtain new information about something specific to rowing, what would be your top resources? Where would you go to gain that?
That's the thing. It's hard. Like I think like because I've been coached by a lot of people in my time as a rower, and I'd say I can probably count on two fingers how many good coaches I've had. If there's things you want to like improve or work on, then I think I'd probably use Valeri Kleshnev. I think I really trust him. I think he's a really good resource. Because we use him a lot, I just fire him an email if I have a question about something. His whole sort of profession is the biomechanics of rowing. So I think I'll use him a lot. Donald as well. I use Donald as a sounding board because he's come from the same sort of ethos and technical focus. But also using people like yourself has been really useful because I was never trained in terms of strength and conditioning. It was just what I was did on the national team. I know they have that now, but when I was on the national team, you can just go and go to the gym and say, right, do weights, and it didn't matter how badly we did it or we didn't know anything about reps or training cycles or anything like that. We just went and did weights, it wasn't that fussed on what exercises we did either. Really, it was just go in the gym for an hour and do whatever you fancy.
Yeah.
And I think you sort of learned a lot more from that. And I did have sort of pretty horrible back injuries when I was rowing, and I think it's one of the things of having you at the school and the programs that you set up as well is that we don't really have many injuries with what the boys are doing. We stay pretty much injury free. So I think and I've learned a lot from what you've brought to the boat club as well. And I think which has been really useful. So I think and then also Stephen Feeney as well. We've used him in the development of the psychology of the group. So I think it's just building the team of people around you that you trust and you value, because I think it's not about just getting there might be a very successful coach that you want to use, but if they're completely technically on the different spectrum, then it's a waste of time, because you've got to have you've got to have a vision of how you want to do something. And I think the coaches or the people around it have got to be on the same page. Otherwise, I think it just becomes a conflict and it won't work. So I think it's having the sort of mind, the foresight to, like I said to you earlier about realizing I don't know everything and you're always still learning. And I think being able to use the people around you, I think is to keep learning is really important.
Sure. No, I completely agree, mate. And I've been involved in all different levels of sport, from the elite level to junior development for a long time, and there's a lot of things that I still have no idea about, and it's so valuable having those experts or those people specialists in certain areas that you can just talk to and ask their advice, with no agenda, and they just, you can trust them to give you their honest opinion, and I think that's really important. I've been in lots of situations before where people are scared to ask or don't really like to, I suppose, admit that they don't know. Which is, I was guilty of that when I was younger, but it's something now which I openly admit, and I think is important. Otherwise, you can just get stuck in a way.
Yeah. I think also some coaches, I see it in rowing, get really possessive.
Right.
Of the crew or the team. They think, no, this is mine. This is I'm the coach. I'm in charge of this process. And they almost feel threatened to open it up, that they're going to be exposed as not knowing enough or not being good enough or whatever. But maybe I was a bit like that in the past. But I think part of the thing of being a good coach is being open and not being worried to use other people.
Mm. Yeah, well, I completely agree, mate. And I think the more opinions or more information you've got is better than having less, and you can choose what you do with that. But if you if you don't have those options, I think you create less for yourself moving forwards.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple more questions for you, and then I'll let you go. What would you say, from a sports science or strength and conditioning kind of perspective? Would you say that the top exercises or drills would be that you value above and beyond others to help maximise the development of a junior rower?
You mean on the boat or in land?
Both. Yeah, if you can maybe give us an example of one or two examples from like on the boat and on land.
I mean, I'd say like in the boat is basically the change of direction, like the connection of the change of direction is actually very difficult to put your blade in the water and change direction effectively. You know, it looks easy, but it's really, really hard to do. And, you know, and internationally, crews still don't do it very well. So I'd say my favourite exercise on the water is this exercise called grip and let go, where the boys, basically the stroke, you have to think about trying to put the blade in the water as your hands are moving away from you. So you're trying to put the blade in on the way forward, but you have to change direction. They call it, like Valeri calls it, the hammer and nail effect. You know, you need to engage your legs like you're hammering a nail. So if you try and hammer a nail and then stop the hammer just before it hits the nail, you're not going to create force. So you have to use the force, the force of your legs, but the momentum of your body weight, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And to do that without kicking the boat backwards and also without missing the water with the blade is really, really hard to do. So without getting too technical on it, it's basically you try and put the blade in the water just as you're changing direction. You try and hang your weight off of it and let go of the oar instantly. And in an 8, you can only do it with like half the crew. Otherwise, you'll fall in. But you basically, like, if you miss time or you don't do it right, you won't feel the weight on the oar until you're about a foot through the stroke. But if you do it well, you'll feel the weight on the oar instantly, and that's when you let it go. So if you get it wrong, you hang on to the oar too long. So it basically teaches you to change direction. It's one of these things I tried to explain to people before, and they just don't get at all. So I have to end up taking a video and then showing it, because it's much more easy to see it visually than explain it. But it's basically my favourite exercise is to teach people how to change direction effectively and using leg power and body momentum as well, body weight momentum. So that's really important. I'd say on the land, a couple of things really, like we use the row perfects quite a lot. They're sort of like not the static ergos, they're dynamic, so the cage moves rather than the seat. So it's a bit more like rowing. So we I wouldn't say it's an exercise as such, but we do a lot of our low intensity stuff on there, because it, like if you do a lot of your rowing on static ergos, you move your mass up and down, where on a boat your mass almost stays still and it's your legs that move, not your body. So we sort of focus more on being quite sort of light in the feet and enabling the boat to come to you or the machine to come to you and push it away again. So we do a lot of stuff on that to like focus on the movement pattern, because if you focus too much on the static, you move in a completely different way than you would move in the boat. And you look at the British team, like the British heavyweight team, like they constantly use statics all the time, and I think that's why they're injured a lot and they don't row so well, because they row to the ergo rather than row to the boat. So we use that a lot, but also rowing is a leg driven sport, so it's doing the stuff in the gym which is going to make you sort of, well, basically you think about it like the rowing stroke from the catch, you're mainly using your quads, and then once your shin and your thigh get to right angle, it's extension of hamstring, glutes and hip flexors, and so it's basically like this, and the stuff you're doing in the gym is making sure that one, the guys aren't getting injured, but also that those areas are being like developed so they can have a powerful enough stroke to open their backs against their legs like through the drive. So it's sort of like water ergo and what they're doing in the gym. I think there's the three main elements of training and the exercise.
Sure. No, that's really interesting. And I know that we've played around with the selection of lower body exercises that we get the boys to use, and I think we found a nice recipe. And they're not necessarily overly complicated or over sexy exercises. They just get them strong, and
yeah,
I think that's where sometimes people kind of get it wrong, is that they just overcomplicate it when it doesn't really need to be such. It just needs to be simple and effective, and the blend of things the guys seem to be doing now seems to be working and working well. So that's great to see.
I think there's also thing as well. Like they don't need to be like horrendously strong. Like they just need to have a certain amount of power that they can maintain for a very long period of time. So like you see it internationally. You get these guys who are horrendously powerful, but don't win races because it's they don't row well enough, but two, they can't maintain what they're doing. So you're better off being a little bit maybe a little bit lighter, a little bit less powerful, but having the ability to stay on the red line for a long period of time is more important than the actual sort of huge amount of force that you can produce in a minute or so.
I think that ability of robustness and ability to break down as little as possible over a long amount of time is really important.
Yeah.
And I think obviously strength plays a massive part to that, but also efficiency of technique and not leaking energy unnecessarily can really help too. So the last question I've got, mate, is really just for those listening who are rowers themselves or coaches themselves or involved in the sports science support of rowers, and that's what your kind of top pieces of advice would be for those who are, from your experience as an athlete and as a coach, that lead to kind of the success in the sport. What would be your thoughts on that?
It's a really difficult one to answer, to be honest. I think sort of like having the work ethic is key, but I think it's also being in a program where you're going to be guided, like technically. I think there are very few sort of clubs that do that, really, if I'm honest. Even places like Leander, they're sort of, really well-known rowing institutions, but, it's just a work factory, really. I don't think they really think about how they're doing it. I rowed at Leander for 8 years, and I came away from there not really knowing how to row properly. So I don't know, really. It's a really difficult one to answer. I don't want to sort of sound like completely snobbish and say that there's very few places where you're going to learn to row really well. But if I'm honest, it's pretty true. But I'm not sure I can really answer it, to be honest.
All good. I think what you said is really valuable already, and I think people can take a lot away from that. So I think that's a pretty good answer. So finally, Bobby, if people wanted to get in touch with you, maybe to ask some follow-up questions or pick your brains, what's the best way that they could do that?
What do you suggest?
Maybe they can just contact Extreme Sports Performance through info@extremesportsperformance.com, or go onto the contact page of the website, and then I can steer the questions to you from there, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for your time, mate. I know that you are with your family in America, so I really appreciate you speaking to me. But yeah, thanks very much. Stay on the line whilst we end the recording. But Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and thanks for your time.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the 24th episode. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please leave us a rating and or review on whichever platform you're listening on. Please check out our website, www.extremesportsperformance.com. On our media page, we have weekly blogs that include Thought of the Week, Exercise of the Week, Recipe of the Week, and Training Song of the Week. Each month's collection gets compiled into our monthly newsletter along with company service and store updates. You can sign up for free to receive this via our subscribe page. Our online store consists of training programs, online and in-person coaching, nutrition plans, toolbox and interactive training systems. Please follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Links to these can be found at the bottom of every page on our website or via any search engine. That's all for now. Until next time, take care.